So thank you very much for coming. I believe my mic is working now, correct? All right. Thank you very much for coming and listening about the CPA exam and what the Board of Examiners and Prometric and NASBA and all the other constituencies are going to be spending a lot of time on over the next few years, and it's called the practice analysis. The practice analysis is a multi-year process that we go through to help ensure that the exam continues to be relevant, continues to test the right kind of things in the right kind of ways to protect the public interest and give us an exam that is accurate and defensible. The last practice analysis we did completed in 2008, and we are about 3 months into the active part of this current practice analysis, and there was 6 months of work ahead of that we spent. The two questions that we're asking are those two. What do we test and how do we test it? That really simply is what the practice analysis is. And with most things that you boil down to this most simple components, there are 6 billion little things that go in to answering those two questions. The first one, what do we test? How much do we test on inventory? How much do we test on receivables? How much do we test on pension plans? What depth of level do we go down in the standards, whether it be financial or auditing or BEC or whatever it might happen to be? What kinds of questions do we ask? Do we ask questions that is a memorization question? Do we ask questions that require students to analyze something, come to some kind of a conclusion? All those kinds of questions we're asking when we're looking at the what do we test component. The how do we test component is what's the look and feel of the exam when you sit down to take it. Not the questions you're answering, but how you're answering those questions. Right now we have multiple choice questions and task-based simulations. That's it. Well, and the writing on BEC. Should we think about using some kind of audio component or video component? Do we create different kinds of task-based simulations that get more to candidates using judgment? How would we go about doing that? All these kinds of questions, and about 5,000 more that I can't even think of right at the moment, are the kinds of questions we're asking as part of the practice analysis. Ultimately, we're getting down to the bottom box here. Provide data to define the scope of the CPA exam. And there's lots and lots of steps, and they're summarized in just a few places right here. But the first piece is determine the scope of entry-level practice. We're doing that via a variety of ways, one of which is a series of 16 focus groups. We had one here today, or yesterday, Wednesday, lose track of time. We had one here Wednesday afternoon with regulators from around the country, and we're asking them questions, or what are the skills and knowledge that entry-level accountants should have. Those 16 focus groups, this being one of them, cover other kinds of regulators, including SEC and PCAOB, academics, the business and industry, a couple of them from business and industry, many of them in public accounting, including people that are directly supervising entry-level CPAs and that are indirectly supervising them. That's just the first step. That gets us kind of the broad brush, or what are the skills and knowledge that people need to know. We're also working with the content committees, those committees that put together the questions for the CPA exam, to help us try to determine the new content specification outlines, the CSOs and the SSOs. So not only what's the general level of knowledge and skills people need, but now how much are we going to test this component of inventory? At what depth are we going to do that? What breadth are we going to do that? That is going to be put out to the general public for comment at some point. We are also going to talk to the focus groups and other constituencies about the second item, identify how entry-level practice is changing. Mentioned that the last time we did this was 2008. It's now 2014. We not only need to know what's going on today, but we need to get an idea of what's going to go on in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, because we need to be prepared for that as well. We're also going to look at how we test the content. A lot of that is psychometric. There's lots of cool things you can do, but sometimes you can't get a test. You can't test in a way that gives you a psychometrically accurate outcome, even though it's a cool thing to do. So we obviously have to make sure we're asking questions and testing questions in such a way that we can get an outcome that we're all satisfied with. And part of that process is determining kind of where the edge of the envelope is for this next iteration. This process is being overseen by the Board of Examiners with the assistance primarily of two other groups, the BOE sponsor group and the sponsor advisory group. And in a second, I'll show you the membership in each one of those. There's membership from across the country and membership of which NASBA is very, very much involved. The sponsor group, we meet at least monthly. Over the next 6 months or so, we're probably going to be meeting twice a month, almost always with a phone call or some kind of a video kind of call. Those are the 6 members that are part of the sponsor group. Wendy Perez, Jimmy Corley, and Mary DeVries are people who have had or have experience in state board, being a state board member someplace in the country. I'm the chair of this group as well as the chair of the Board of Examiners, and we have the Future Content Committee chair and our psychometrician that's involved with this process as well. These are the people that work most closely with the examinations team in Ewing on a, seems like almost daily basis. The sponsor advisory group is a broader group that is going to help advise the sponsor group and help get the word out to further constituencies around the country. As you can see from the chart up here, we have big firms and small firms and PCAOB and SEC. Some of these folks, Rick Reisig, for instance, right in the middle of the page there, he is a state board member. He was on the BOE, just rolled off last year. So a considerable breadth of areas, firm types, and parts of the country, and kinds of businesses that they're all involved with. This group meets about every 3 months, generally electronically. This is going to be a communications channel. It's going to be a way that we can test some of the things we're thinking to a broader group of people. And this is a project timeline, and you can't see it particularly well, although you might be able to see it in your handouts. We're in 2014, and we've done interviews, and we're about halfway through the focus groups. We're going to administer a survey, and that survey is going to go out to about 3,000 individuals that get right down into the details. This kind of thing does a practicing CPA need to know? Yes or no? How much do they need to know it? How deep do they need to go into it? How important is it in your business? And that broad spectrum of people covers public, business and industry, regulators, whole wide variety of folks. We are going to have 2 and maybe 3 specific official comment periods and comment documents. When we put these in, we were thinking we were going to have 2. We may end up having 3. We're not quite sure about that yet, but these 2 are for sure. We're going to have an invitation to comment that's going to ask you whether the direction we're going with the content is appropriate. And the exposure draft is going to combine the output of that invitation to comment plus the survey, plus other mechanisms to talk to people into one giant exposure draft that's going to come out towards the middle of 15. The dates might vary just a little bit. I want you to make sure that you pay attention when these documents come out. We'll make sure that you're informed about them because your input on these is critical to the next exam. Colleen, would you like a clicker?
Thank you, Rick. Now I'm Colleen Conrad, NASBA's Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer and former chair of the Missouri State Board of Accountancy, is going to update us on the international administration of the Uniform CPA examination. Colleen?
Thank you, Tyrone. Before I get started, thank you, Rick, for your presentation. This practice analysis is just so crucial, and NASBA will be making sure that we remind you when the invitation to comment and the exposure draft come out. We will be alerting you and really encouraging you as state boards to respond to it. This is when the exam changes. This is when we took the exam from paper and pencil to computerization. That's when BEC as a section was introduced. And that was on the heels of a practice analysis. So the sections could change, the number of sections could change. The way that things are put together can really change at that point. So we really asked you to take a look at it. And we also are going to be encouraging you to provide names of people to send the surveys to. You'll be hearing from us and from AICPA asking you for lists of CPAs who meet the criteria to respond to the survey. So be watching out for that too. I kind of laughed as we came up here. Rick and I decided to stand, not go up on the podium. And I said, do you want to be on the left or the right? He said, do you want to be a debit or a credit? And we both looked at the room, and you know, right? Debits on the window, credits on the door side. We looked, and we were very confused. We were either both credits or both debits or all the same here. I was asked to speak to you about the international exam, what's happening on the international front, but I also realize we have lots of new board members here, and we probably have interest on domestic numbers and volume too. We had some professors present their research, and it's all very interesting to us. A lot of the information that they got from what we have, the database of information we have on the exam. And a lot of these slides that I have put together are from our team pulling that information. The domestic numbers are fairly flat the last 3 years. You see a spike in 2010, and that's right before we made some fairly significant changes to the examination, and so everybody was trying to get in under the wire. So that's the spike, and then you're going to see a drop off after that. That's natural. But they really we haven't had the trends that we have had with continuing increases in volume. So that's something that we watch and AICPA watches too. A couple of these slides are from the candidate performance books that we publish, which we provide free to all the state boards. And some of this statistical information you can actually go on our website and see. But I'm not going to go through all of it, but I did want to make sure that you had it in your books and make sure that you were aware of it. BEC has the highest pass rates and the lowest volume, which we find interesting. I know AICPA has done some research on that, and there's some conclusion that many of the review course providers suggest that candidates take that section last. So some candidates, maybe never, the underperforming candidates that struggle with the other sections never get to this one, so those that get to it maybe pass at a higher rate. We find that somewhat interesting. Have on here which states have the most candidates, which states have the highest pass rates, and some just good general information. Here we look at ages and male versus female. We're really close to 50-50 right now. I will say back a while that we went through a period where there were more females than males sitting for the exam. Switched back with WorldCom and Enron. I guess the profession became sexier or something, so more men started getting back into the profession. But we are back to a trend where we are seeing more men than women, but it's fairly close. You'll notice the age of the candidate, average age of the candidate by window. That's not by year, that's by window. And you see the significant drop in the third quarter of each year. The obvious is that the students are testing in that particular window. So they're looking at a July-August test frame. CPA Pipeline. Here we use the term cohort, which are, as it says, it's the candidates who began testing in a given year. And then that's the blue, and then the red are those that have passed their fourth section of the examination. And I think there's some, looking at this, the trends are more positive than they are in some of the other ways we slice and dice the number. I think it may be showing us, too, that candidates are passing the examination faster and that there's less overlap in years. So that, I think, is one effect of what we're seeing there. Someone asked earlier, I think, that we were looking at gender and age. Find this slide interesting. This has the female, women on top, and it's looking at by age group. Age 20 to 24 is the first one there, and the number of sections taken and their average score. So the score is the red line. Very obviously, and as it probably wouldn't surprise you, and came out in the research that we heard about a little earlier, is the older you get, the harder it is to pass the exam. We do find it interesting that a higher proportion of women sit in the age 20 to 24 age group than men. I don't know if that's because they're smarter and they know that they need to sit more quickly or what is causing that, but we find that interesting. And this would be an encouragement to candidates to get the exam under your belt as quick as you can. Don't go to work and then try to get it done once you've started working if you have that capability. I will note in the last section that you got that over 65 age group that are taking the exam. Isn't that awesome? I actually met one of these people a month ago. I was giving a speech to some Illinois educators. One of the professors, an older gentleman, was going back and taking the examination. So I thought that was pretty cool. So let's switch to the international exam. And knowing that we do have a number of newer board members in the room, I would like to just give you a little background. We began testing internationally in 2011, so 3 years ago. It was in August of 11. It's hard to believe it's already been 3 years. The testing mirrors the domestic exam. You go to a Prometric test center, just like you would here in the United States. The application process is very similar. You sit during the same windows. The security, everything around the exam is the same, whether you're sitting in Tokyo or you're sitting here in Louisville. Only certain jurisdictions do accept international candidates. It is the majority, I would say. I think it's 44. Look at my numbers on that. Yes, 44 allow. So many do, but some states do not allow international candidates. And then the question is, who can test abroad? Any U.S. citizen, so we do have a lot of those that are working abroad or in the armed forces that take the exam internationally. And we also do allow people from the country where we allow the testing, and in some cases from neighboring countries. I'll give you a little bit more about that here in a minute. So where are we testing? Right now we're testing in Japan, the Middle East, and the countries that we are testing in follow where it says Middle East, and then also to citizens and long-term residents from some of the regionally close countries. And we also test in Brazil, and that's open to all countries in South America. And you ask, how did we decide to go there and not somewhere else? Well, we look at where we have volume of candidates who have maybe traveled to the United States to take the exam. So where are the international candidates of interest? We want to make sure that we can keep the exam secure so that we're not in a country where the security of the questions and the bank of questions could be compromised. We also are looking where Prometric has test centers. And so that is definitely something else that we look at. I would like to mention we haven't had any really changes in where we're testing over the last year, but we're on the cusp of announcing new countries that we will be going into, as well as expansion. There's a lot of discussion at the level between AICPA, Prometric, and NASBA about should we be, like we did in South America, can we open up to countries in an area, like in the Middle East? Could we open up to all Middle East countries? We can't, for political reasons, go into India, but maybe we could open up the Middle East to candidates from India. And there are a lot of candidates from India who would like to take the exam. So we are considering things like that. International outreach. You probably won't be hearing about it because you're not in the Middle East or Japan, but we do have a presence there. Our communication teams, AICPAs and NASBAs and Prometrics, really work hard to outreach to potential candidates in these countries. So we really make a lot of use of webinars, and I have to give some credit to our team, people like Ed Barnicott and Pat Hartman, who do these webinars for the Middle East at 5 o'clock in the morning in New Jersey, and make sure that we do it at times that are good for the candidates. We also have a Japanese language website, and we have summaries of the CPA exam alert, which is the newsletter that AICPA puts out in Arabic and Japanese. So there's a lot going on in these countries to try and support and encourage testing on the CPA exam. Okay, a few more numbers here. This is the volume in sections. We talk about sections, meaning if you take audit, that's a section. So here's our section volume. The blue is Japan, red, that really thin little line, is Brazil, and Middle East is green. You'll see, again, a drop in 1st quarter 2013. I believe that drop was following, we did have a drop in Japan because of the earthquake and the tsunami. As you can imagine, it was not the biggest, taking the exam was not the priority at that point. But we are seeing kind of a flattening in numbers internationally. On another slide, I'll show you how over the past 3 years some of the numbers have changed. But the Middle East is up roughly 10%. And we are seeing country by country, as you'll see on this slide, some interesting things. Japan, first of all, go to the growth 3-year column. You'll see red there, which is negative, a negative variance. 3 years back from 13 was when we had CBTE, so we had it's looking back to 2010 when we had that big spike in volume. So I would discount that number. Next year, it probably will be a more normalized set of statistics. But look at China, probably no surprise there. 1-year increase of almost 36% in China, and that is our fastest growing country where we are having a lot of candidates. I would also look at Saudi Arabia and Jordan, again, significant increases in the Middle East. Here's the international testing pipeline. When a candidate, not a U.S. citizen, but an international candidate wants to take the exam in an international location, they have to agree to more things than you do if you take it domestically. The main one is that you have to agree to get licensed in 3 years, within 3 years after you've taken that 4th section, okay? So this is showing the numbers of those that have passed their 4th section and those have been licensed. So if you looked at 2011, remember that's that stub year when we started the exam. 167 passed all 4 parts between August and December. and 93 of those, as of about 2 or 3 weeks ago, were licensed at that point. So these are statistics that we will continue to watch. And state boards, this is something you need to think about, is if they don't get licensed in those 3 years, how do you want to handle their scores, whether it shows that they passed the exam or not. Because you remember, many international candidates are passing it to say, I am qualified and I know U.S. standards, U.S. GAAP, I'm qualified. They're not as interested in the license. So something to watch. Okay, and I have a couple slides here that will be new to those of you that have been around a while that you haven't seen before. James Sun and his group are doing some fascinating work looking at digging down into more specific areas of content and skills. So here we're looking at the FT as first-time testers, the BEC section, and we know that writing is tested, communication is tested on BEC. So we picked out some of the international areas where we test and show how many sections were given of BEC in 2013, and the percentage is the percentage of exam sections scoring comparable or stronger than the baseline. Okay, so it's showing Japan is the lowest number there. The national numbers are over on the right. So 75% of the candidates in the United States are scoring, very well in communications. And in Japan, that's probably the lowest area. A lot of this centers around language skills. If they're not English-speaking countries, but this exam is only given in English. So that is always going to be a challenge to them. Here's business law in the regulation section of the exam. Same setup. Here, United States, we see that some of the international candidates are really testing pretty well on business law, which you might find interesting. In the United States, it's at 62.8%, Lebanon at 67.2%. Again, Japan lags a little bit, but they're the ones that have the less English skills probably than the others. So that's just a few statistics and some information about what's happening on the international front. I think at this time we do have some time, and Rick and I would both be happy to entertain any questions if you have them.
Realizing, of course, that normally if you're between you and lunch or you and dinner, that's not a good thing. Well, it's even worse because we're between you and the raffle.
But let me say this. They will go unnamed, but I had someone say, Colleen, you may not see me in your session because post time at Churchill Downs is at 2:45. And I said, but I wore my horsey scarf today, so doesn't that count for something? No.
Apparently not.
Anyway, well, thank you very much for your time, and Ruben.
Is that okay?
You do have a question?
I do have a question.
Please ask.
You talked about people wanting to take the exam and proving that they knew U.S. GAAP. And I was kind of wondering, was there actually specific sampling to talk to, maybe going to accounting programs in other countries, that looking at people who took the exam and who didn't take the exam, kind of what influenced their decision on whether or not to take it? So that's question number one. So.
Okay. Do you want to take it or do you want me to take it?
Go ahead.
Okay. I know that we have surveyed candidates and those who have recently taken the examination to better understand why, because the volume is okay, but we'd like to see it better. So we're trying to get a handle on, why they want to take the examination. And really it is, many of them are in industry, and they use it as a way to improve their profile in their organization for purposes of getting promotions or salary increases. But they are dealing with United States companies, and it's our economy and our financial markets are still very much of mind for people working in accounting in other countries. So it can be a very valuable skill set to have, and it's prestigious.
Okay. The other question I had related to the writing portion of the exam, and my recollection of this was that when the writing was graded, it was not based on the correctness of content, but merely the grammar. So I'm wondering if that has changed.
I'll take that one. It's not quite that simple, but predominantly it is the quality of the English component. You still have to answer the question. You can't be off in left field. So you have to be kind of around what the question is asking, but it's predominantly how well you use English grammar correctly and sentence structure and paragraph structure and things of that nature. That has not changed at this point, although as we're going through the practice analysis, that question is going to be one of the questions.
And I'm sorry, the question, what question will be?
The question of should we be, what sections should have writing in them? What kinds of questions should we ask that we're asking candidates to write to? And how do we grade it? What kinds of things are we going to be looking for in the grading?
And last question is, if you look at the pass rates, one of my concerns is that the pass rates are high. That they've trended up from a beginning of, I think, high 30s to the most recent statistics I saw were 50% roughly, give or take, depending on the section. So to me, that was a concern. Is any of that an issue? So I'll just leave that as kind of an open-ended question. Thank you.
We shouldn't be, and I'm sure nobody in the room is surprised if we go from an exam where you have to sit and take all 4 parts in 2.5 days or 2 days to allowing people to take them one at a time. Even if you're using exactly the same test, you're going to end up with higher.
Same exam, computer to computer. Those were the stats.
Yeah. As a section goes on, test takers become more familiar with the kinds of questions you're asking. Review course providers become more familiar with it. And so there is, in the test-taking world, a natural increase in the percentage of people percentage of people successfully passing each section. Having said that, part of this whole process, part of the practice analysis process, is that we are going to create, at least to some extent, a different test, and we're going to create new cut score passing levels as part of this entire process. That comes towards the end, but that's an important piece of it.
I'd like to speak to that a minute, too. If you were here for the session that Ken Bishop and Carlos did yesterday morning, they spoke to this a little bit, Ruben, in that there is concern, and it not about the examination and the legal defensibility and anything like that, but there is concern about pass rates. There's concern about many things surrounding that, and I know that we are having an ongoing conversation with AICPA about that.
Getting into the nuts and bolts of the psychometric side so that we can all understand it better.
Right. And by the way, Ruben, thank you, Davila from California, used to be on the Board of Examiners, so that's why he gets to ask hard questions like that. Any other questions? Mark?
I do have a question, and Rick, I think this is directed more toward you, though Colleen, feel free to chime in. This is one that I asked yesterday, and we heard earlier that there's no real difference in pass rates in regard to the candidates who are sitting after 120 as opposed to those that take it after 150. My question is the exam going to be designed for those who have just completed their education, or is it going to be designed for those that actually have a year or so of experience?
Very good question. We are asking questions of the focus groups, the surveys, the invitations to comment, all of that based on newly licensed CPAs. Not just right out of school, because you have to have the 3 E's to be licensed. So by implication, you're a couple years out, couple years out, something like that. I mean, the 65-year-old that's going to pass, it's going to be a few more years out than that.
He was struggling with a few of the sections, by the way, I must say.
I think we all would struggle with some of the sections if we had to do it over again. So we're looking at newly licensed CPAs. That's the definition that we're going towards. Very good question.
Right. It doesn't have anything to do with passing, where they are in school. It's what does it take to be a minimally competent CPA? So that's often confusion. People think, well, it's an entry-level CPA, and the term entry-level CPA, you can't think that way. You have to think this person, once they have their CPA license, can go out and hang up a shingle and do tax returns and do audits, and are they minimally competent to be able to do that? Great question, though. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Colleen and Rick.
Thank you.